from Toledo, born and raised, went to Whitmer High School, graduated in 2000, went to Bradley University, which is in Peoria, Illinois, graduated there from 2004. In 2004, I studied radio, TV, broadcasting, and also history. So being a sports reporter, sports broadcaster, I always wanted to do this ever since I was a little kid. I'm sure my mom could tell you a story. I delivered the Toledo Blade as a kid in about 6th and 7th grade. And so you're waking up in the morning to fold the papers before you deliver them. And I'm always watching SportsCenter back then in the early to mid 90s. So it was kind of the golden era of SportsCenter with Dan Patrick and Keith Olbermann when SportsCenter was really fun. And so basically when I was 11, 12, 13 years old, I said, I want to do that. And that dream never really went away. So graduated college in 2004. My first job was in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, Marquette, Michigan, was there for about 2 years. And then I went to Lansing, Michigan for about 2 years as well and covered Michigan State. And you had some minor league baseball there, the Lansing Lugnuts, and got to cover some of the Detroit teams as they went to the playoffs. That 2006 Tigers team, of course, which coincidentally then loses to the Cardinals. And I end up then moving to St. Louis in 2008. So I've been at the same TV station, the Fox TV station in St. Louis since 2008. I also do sports talk radio there. So yeah, I've been there now almost 14 years. It'll be 14 years in April.
All right. Some of your duties at the TV or radio station?
Yeah, so TV is my main job, and our sports department now we have, I guess we had a guy just retire, so we have 2 people. So I anchor a ton of the sportscasts. Right now I have Sundays and Mondays off, so I anchor a ton of the sportscasts Tuesday through Saturday. And we have so many shows at our station. We actually have 2 TV stations in the same building. We have the KPLR station, which is kind of the old WB network. So we have so many newscasts. Basically, if you're working that day, you're anchoring 5, 6, 7 shows, because the way local news is now, it's almost like cable news, where for our evening shows, we have a 4 p.m., a 5 p.m., a 6 p.m., a 7 p.m., a 9 p.m., a 10 p.m. I think we're the only TV station in the Central Time Zone that has an 11 p.m. So we're doing a lot of different sportscasts. But what I really enjoy about my job is actually when I'm not anchoring and I'm able to go out to the Cardinals games, go out to the Blues games, go out and cover Mizzou football, Mizzou basketball, which is, University of Missouri is about 2 hours away from St. Louis. St. Louis U basketball is pretty good. They've been to the NCAA tournament several times since I've been here. So I really enjoy being out covering the teams and covering the stories as opposed to just kind of anchoring each night.
All right. Do you have a sign off, a saying that, long gone,
catchphrases?
Or stood by the side of the road, anything like that?
I like that. Some Ernie Harwell.
Yeah.
Let's see. Stood there by a house by the side of the road. I'm trying to think of the other Ernie Harwells I grew up with. I never really had a catchphrase like that. And that doesn't mean I don't try to be funny, and I'm sure I'm corny sometimes, but I never really developed that key catchphrase that I do, but I do try to make it fun. And so it's more kind of based on what's going on that night. I don't have anything that I kind of have my go-to, almost like a Ron Burgundy anchor man, the sports guy there. I think his thing was whammy. So no, I don't do anything like that, but I do try to keep it light and fun. And that's where sometimes on TV, your TV sports segments are between, let's say, 2 and 3 minutes. We have some longer shows on the weekend. Like we had a high school football show last night that goes about probably 12 minutes of content time. We have some longer sports shows on Saturdays and Sundays, but sports talk radio, which I do about 2 hours a day from 12 to 2, I actually do the show with a former NHL player named Cam Jansen, who played hockey for the New Jersey Devils and also the St. Louis Blues. And he's from the St. Louis area. He's from Eureka, Missouri. So when you have a 2-hour radio show and we really only have 2 segments per hour, so you end up having about 50 minutes to really get into the topics. And that's where when you have sports talk radio, you can really get in depth and show off your humor a little more than you can on TV sometimes.
All right, good. Over the years, have you, could you comment on a couple of some really great sports moments, both baseball and other sports?
Sure. So I've been very lucky. If we start with baseball here, so I got to cover that 2006 World Series where the Tigers lose to the Cardinals, of course, and I was at Game 2, which, if you remember, that was the Kenny Rogers game where there was the whole hullabaloo about the pine tar there, and Tony La Russa didn't really make a huge deal about it, but that was the huge story because Kenny Rogers had the big scuff, which is kind of funny because now if you fast forward 14 years later, that was the biggest story in baseball, was basically all the sticky stuff pitchers were using and the spider tack and how they were getting an unfair advantage with spin rate and some of these different substances. And that was what, 14, 15 years ago. So no, got to cover that World Series. And then 2011 was a lot of fun because at that time I was in St. Louis to watch the Cardinals win the World Series. And if you remember that year, David Freese, who's another hometown guy, he's from St. Louis, Missouri. He went to Lafayette High School, and he just had the most amazing postseason. That Game 6 where he has a triple to tie the game and send it into extra innings. And then you have the hometown kid hitting the home run, the walk-off homer in Game 6 to send it to Game 7, where, of course, the Cardinals beat the Rangers there. And I also got to cover the 2013 World Series where the Boston Red Sox beat the Cardinals. So we were on the other side of that one. And then if you just look at some other sports, and some of you Ohioans, or at least half of you, will probably enjoy this, but I got to cover the national championship game down in Texas where Ohio State beat Oregon. So that was the 2015 season, the 2016 playoff there, the first ever college football playoff. And I basically, because I'm an Ohio State fan, I kind of finagled my way to cover that. But we had a good local angle because Ezekiel Elliott, the star running back for Ohio State, is also from St. Louis. So you always try to find those local angles there. So I was able to cover that game. And also later on when Ezekiel Elliott got drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, that was up in Chicago a couple of years later. And then 2019, my final thing I'll talk about here was the St. Louis Blues won their first ever Stanley Cup. And the franchise that had been around at the time for 50 years, they have this great fan base. They had never won the Stanley Cup. So even though I'm more of a baseball fan, more of a football fan, covering the 2019 St. Louis Blues was probably the most fun I ever had in my profession, just because it was a team that was in last place. They fired their coach. They brought up this goalie that nobody expected anything from. And he went crazy. He played really well. The team went from literally worst to first. And that playoff run, which was the last postseason before COVID, so it was the last fun playoffs where you had fans and you had the parade and all that. And if you remember that team, you had the song Gloria that they played. That was kind of their theme song. You had this young girl named Layla who was battling cancer, who kind of became this big story along the way. And then your playoff run lasts a good 2 months. And with each series the Blues won, people got more and more excited. And it was just this great finish where they beat the Boston Bruins in 7 games. And finally, the St. Louis Blues had their first ever Stanley Cup.
Wow. Cool.
Of course, over the years, you've seen many outstanding baseball players come into St. Louis. You had a long time Albert Pujols and Kershaw, and now with interleague play, you see some of the American League players. Could you comment on a couple of players that maybe you think might be destined for the Hall of Fame, or maybe a comment on a player that you've had for an interview that you thought was a super interview for yourself?
Sure. And I'll stick with Cardinals guys. You mentioned Albert Pujols. So I got to St. Louis in 2008. So I got to see Albert Pujols play till 2011 when they won the World Series, and then he left for the Angels. Albert Pujols was the most just ridiculously talented, amazing player I've ever seen in my life. And I think it's kind of unfortunate that his drop off, especially the last 5 years with the Angels, was so stark that I think sometimes we forget how amazing he was. If you go back and look at Albert Pujols, his first 11 years in the major leagues, we're talking about the best 11 years up there with Babe Ruth, You look at Mike Trout's numbers right now, where everybody says Mike Trout is the greatest player in baseball, which he probably is, but Albert's offensive numbers are right up there. So he had a drop off later in his career. But if you look at from 2001 to 2011, the things Albert Pujols did, and I was so lucky to cover some of his games. That World Series, he had a 3 home run game in 2011 in Texas. I remember a random weekend against the Cubs where Albert Pujols just hit back-to-back either walk off or go ahead home runs. And I was sitting there in the press box thinking, this is amazing. I get paid to watch this guy play. It's crazy. And he would have those moments 5, 6, 7 times a year. So I think sometimes people forget how great Albert Pujols was. And when you look at his numbers, he's still right up there with, he could get 700 homers next year if he comes back and plays, which that's another interesting storyline. If the National League gets the DH, which a lot of people think is going to happen, could Albert Pujols come back and finish his career with the Cardinals? That would be pretty cool. And then some other Cardinals of that same era, Yadier Molina is going to be in the Hall of Fame. Just a fantastic defensive catcher, a guy who got better offensively each year, a leader. He's the most beloved player in St. Louis. Everybody in St. Louis loves him. He always defends his team, his city. He'll get into it with other players over the years. There was a brawl with the Cincinnati Reds years ago, and it's because Yadier Molina is always standing up for St. Louis. So he's a great player that'll make it to the Hall of Fame as well. And then another guy, because you asked me about just great interviews. So Adam Wainwright is a really, really good pitcher who's also been with the Cardinals since 2005. And he'll be a Cardinals Hall of Famer, meaning the Cardinals, they have their own Hall of Fame, which is also made for guys that are just a kind of a peg below Cooperstown. So Adam Wainwright probably won't make it to Cooperstown just because his numbers aren't there and he had some injuries. But this is a guy, I always call him a top 5 human. He's the perfect human. He's a great interview. He's super funny. If you watch the White Sox Astros series, he actually went into the booth for Fox Sports 1 here over the weekend before the Astros beat the White Sox, and he was commentating on those games. So whenever he retires, which might be next year, he's going to be a commentator. He's really funny. He's great off the field. He and his wife, they have this great foundation where they go to impoverished countries, third world countries. They're building hospitals. They're building wells. He's doing all kinds of stuff in St. Louis, for human trafficking. He's just one of those guys where you can't find anything wrong with him. So he's one of those guys that's a really great interview. If you interview him, it's almost like you don't have to do any work. If you put the microphone in front of his face, he's going to give you good stuff.
All right. You mentioned the Baseball Hall of Fame. And for many years, it was the traditional statistics, for offensive player, the batting average, RBIs, runs scored, things like that. Looking forward down the road, some of those benchmarks like 300 average or 500 home runs or 300 wins are going to be nearly impossible. Do you have any insight into the idea of which statistics will be most important for future Hall of Famers to have?
Sure. So if you want to start with position players, as you said, some of those benchmarks where if you're talking 500 homers, 3,000 hits, I do think position players have a better chance to hit some of those counting stats, certainly than pitchers do. But if you look at offensive stats that are just looked upon more, and you could get real deep into some of the really advanced metrics like expected batting average and on base percentage, but to try to keep it a little more simple, for example, OPS or OPS plus, where batting average is not really focused upon as much as it was back in the day. So your OPS, which is on base plus slugging. And if you're, let's say, above 900, you're a really, really good player. If you're above 800, you're a good player. But if you're above 900, so between your, let's say your on base percentage is 400 and your slugging percentage is 500, you're doing real well. So then OPS plus is a number that's I think pretty easy to understand because it's on a scale of 100. So 100 is your average major league player. So if you have a career OPS plus, let's say of 120, you're 20% above average for your career. So that's a good number that takes into account ballpark factors as well. And so it's pretty easy to look and say, okay, if this guy has an OPS plus of 150, he's 50% better than league average. And that's really, really good right there. And I could go deeper into that, but I don't want to bore you. But if we go into pitching stats, that's where, I don't know if anybody is ever going to hit 300 wins. I think 200 wins is almost going to be what 300 wins is. I think you're still going to have guys rack up a ton of strikeouts. You look at Max Scherzer, another St. Louis, and he's actually from Parkway Central High School here in St. Louis and went to Mizzou. Max Scherzer, he will be in the Hall of Fame. Just hit his 3,000th strikeout. And I do think he'll pitch till he's probably 40, but I think he's close to 200 wins. I didn't look. I know he's close there. Adam Wainwright's also close to 200 wins. But I think you're going to look more at, your strikeout numbers are still important. Your ERA is always going to be important. Your FIP, which is another one of these stats that's more widely talked about, which is fielding independent pitching. So it takes into account your actually kind of takes defense out of it. That's a stat that's really based on strikeouts and walks and basically the balls that are put in play. So yeah, it's one of those things. I understand how kind of old school baseball folks, I don't even like some of the focus, especially on these expected numbers, because if a guy's hitting 200 and they'll say, no, but his expected number is, he should be hitting 300. Well, it's hard as a fan to say, well, guess what? He's still making an out every time out there, but it's more so an indicator of what's to come. So sometimes as a hitter, you can have good or bad, basically batted ball luck. It's called BABIP, your batting average on balls put in play. So if you're hitting 200, let's say, but your expected batting average is 300, over the course of the rest of the year, you should get closer to your expected batting average. So that's a good way to kind of factor in some of the luck of baseball.
Okay. Generally, with COVID today, when you do interviews, are you in the same room as the player or separate rooms?
So we were always in the clubhouses, in the locker rooms, right up until COVID. And then we were on Zoom. Until, I'm trying to think when it really shifted. Now we did local stories. Like if we did a high school story or a small college story, we would still do those in person. I would actually have a mic stand, almost like the mic stand that Steven Tyler would have for Aerosmith. And I would set it up, 6, 8, 10 feet away with a cord. So you were social distancing. But then Major League Baseball, all the different sports kind of had their own rules about opening the clubhouses back up. So basically about halfway or maybe a third of the way through the season, baseball allowed vaccinated members on the field again with masks at first to do interviews. And then you didn't have to wear the mask after a while. Some of the players, though, wanted you still to wear a mask. So everybody did that based on the players' want. So yeah, you had pregame interviews. Almost every sport is still doing post-game Zooms. So they're not doing that right now. And the Blues regular season actually starts tonight. So the Blues, I think the NHL, they're going to allow vaccinated members in the dressing room there with masks on to do interviews post-game. Hockey, you don't really do as many pregame interviews as you do with baseball. Baseball, there's a lot of pregame interviews before the game, around 3:30, 4 o'clock before a 7 o'clock game.
And the radio announcers are at the stadium in the two in the same booth or three?
Yeah, that's another hot topic. So radio, I know for St. Louis, radio traveled, I think they traveled all this season. Now, the TV broadcasters, and I'm guessing this happened with the Tigers. I'm not exactly sure, because are you guys now Bally Sports Detroit?
Correct.
Okay,
correct.
So I'm sure you read about this, where to start the season, so Sinclair bought, I believe, 14 regional sports networks. They bought the Fox Sports Detroit's, the Fox Sports Midwests, and they turned them into Bally Sports Midwest and Detroit, et cetera. And so to start the year, all of the TV broadcasters were doing it from a studio for the road games. And it became this thing because the radio broadcasters were traveling, and a lot of people were complaining. And even the TV broadcasters, they tried to do it subtly. But I'm sure this happened with the Tigers games. If you guys were watching them, I mean, there were some moments where the broadcasters had no idea what was going on for a road game. I mean, you would try to make a call thinking maybe this ball's a home run, and it ends up being 50 feet because you're watching on a monitor. You just don't have that perspective. And I think they used COVID at first, in my opinion. I think rightfully so. They used COVID as a way to start with that. But then a while in, if you have 14 regional sports networks and you're not traveling crews of, let's say, 3 or 4 people with an engineer and all the hotels and the per diem and the meals and all that, I think it became something that was more of a cost saving measure. So there was all kinds of articles written about that in St. Louis that people were ticked off about that. So I would think next year, like they traveled the broadcasters for the playoff games. So I would think next year we're going to get back to normal there.
All right. One last question before we open it up to everyone. I know you spoke at the opening about the managerial situation. Could you sort of give us a little more about that, since a couple people joined in late?
Sure. And this kind of wraps into the question you asked me about stats and whatnot, and kind of philosophical baseball these days. So Mike Shildt, the Cardinals manager, who is a longtime Cardinals guy, 18 years in the organization, came up as a scout, coach, minor league manager, took over for Mike Matheny 3.5 years ago. So his first season almost gets to the playoffs for his half season there, which was what? That would be 2018. So 2019, 2020, 2021, they get to the playoffs all 3 years. They get to the NLCS in 2019. But also those Cardinal teams, even though they got to the playoffs, they weren't the elite Cardinal teams we saw from 2011 to 2015 that were real World Series contenders, but they were good. And the Cardinals are always good. But the funny thing is this past week or so, the report was that they were going to talk to Mike Shildt about a contract extension because he only had 1 year left on his deal. And you guys know how that works. Basically, if you have 1 year left, organizations don't like having a lame duck manager. So you're either going to fire him or you're going to give him a contract extension. And I think Mike Shildt overplayed his hand in the sense that I think after 3.5 years, he was manager of the year in 2019. He got to 3 postseasons, and I think he wanted more of a say. And a lot of the talk and reports is that he wanted to go in a different direction potentially than the hitting coach, Jeff Albert, who the organization is very high on. They really like what Jeff Albert has been doing, especially in the minor leagues. Now, it hasn't really leaked over as much to great offensive numbers in the big leagues. Now, the Cardinals also have a really tough ballpark to hit at. Busch Stadium is a pitcher-friendly park, and the Cardinals did do better clearly in September. They had a 17-game winning streak. But from what I know and who I've talked to, it seems like Mike Shildt potentially wanted his own hitting coach. And at that time, the organization, look, John Mozeliak runs the baseball operations department, and he's basically almost like a son of the owner, Bill DeWitt Jr. And if you get on the wrong side of John Mozeliak, or philosophically, this isn't personal, this is business, but if you don't align with how he wants to play baseball, you're probably not going to be around long. And that's why on Thursday, Mike Shildt was fired, which was really stunning, especially with the fact that a week ago, we're talking about a contract extension. And even John Mozeliak said Mike Shildt himself was stunned. They had to do it over the phone because Mike Shildt had gone back to Charlotte, where he lives. So I was on the radio live when this happened. It's funny. I was interviewing somebody about Mizzou football, and right in the middle of the interview, I'm like, can this be real? So yeah, this was a huge story in St. Louis and across baseball the last couple of days.
All right. Well, thanks. All right. So anyone from the audience have a question for Charlie? Stan, I'll start with you.
Okay. Hi there, guys. Nice to meet you, Charlie. It's interesting. I never knew you were from Toledo. That's good stuff. I read in The Athletic regarding this whole Cardinal manager thing that the Cardinals had a group meeting of coaches and front office people without Shildt even being part of that meeting. I found that was kind of interesting. That is it that front office runs the ball club kind of mentality? Is that what you see over there in St. Louis, or anything to add to that?
Yeah, thank you, Stan. So you're talking about just this past week they had a meeting, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And you probably read Katie Wu as the Cardinals beat writer for The Athletic. She does a really good job. It's her first year. So what happened was, and I don't know exactly because I wasn't in there, but they have these organizational meetings at the end of the year. It's not like an exit interview because most of these guys are coming back, but at the end of the year, you basically you have meetings with all the coaching staff, and the front office and the players, just getting ready for next year and kind of setting the stage for the winter in 2022. So Mike Shildt did have meetings with the Cardinals, and then he goes home because he lives in Charlotte in the off season. But I think what happened was, as I mentioned, I think in those meetings with John Mozeliak and the baseball operations department, there's clearly a philosophical difference, which is what John Mozeliak stated. He kept saying philosophical difference. He didn't really get into it. He was asked about the relationship between Jeff Albert and Mike Shildt. Jeff Albert, again, is the hitting coach. And he said that wasn't the sole reason, but that certainly leads you to believe that it was a reason. And I think it was the biggest reason. But yeah, I think what happened was, organizationally, if you're not aligned on the hitting philosophy, and the Cardinals are thinking about potentially giving this guy a contract extension, let's say for 3 years. And by the way, the Cardinals doing this, that doesn't mean it was the right move. It doesn't mean it's going to work out. You know, the next 2-3 years, we'll see what happens here, but the Cardinals went one way, and Mike Shildt, I think, will get a job somewhere else. But I think after those meetings, the Cardinals said, look, we really like Jeff Albert. We really like what he's doing, especially in the minor leagues. We like the numbers down there and how this could basically help the Cardinals in the future. The Cardinals are very analytics driven. The owner's very analytics driven. They fired Walt Jocketty, who was a great general manager 14, 15 years ago, to allow John Mozeliak to get the job, because Walt Jocketty was a general manager that traded away a lot of his prospects for more proven players. The Cardinals' business model to sustain success over and over is to have a great farm system. And so I think they just said, hey, why do we want to give a contract extension to a manager whose offensive philosophy does not align with ours? And I think that's what happened.
You mentioned.
I thought it was interesting.
Go ahead,
Go ahead.
Stan.
No,
Go
I
ahead.
thought it was interesting too that they had asked MLB to allow them to announce this firing, which normally is a big no-no during the playoffs. And MLB said, sure, go ahead. I'm kind of surprised how quickly they wanted this to get out there. And yet here we are about a week later or so, or a couple of days later, and there's no rumors about who's going to take over or anything. It seemed to be almost an immediate decision. And now they're sitting and waiting. I wondered what came down, if something showed up in his history, or you know, is he friends with John Gruden, or who knows? I found that was kind of strange, the timing and the quickness of it, and yet here they sit.
Right. Now, John Mozeliak did say that it was nothing off the field. Mike Shildt has said he'll make a statement on Monday, so maybe we learn more. I don't think he's going to say that much, especially if it's a statement. Now, maybe he does some interviews here moving forward. Now, Major League Baseball doesn't like things like this announced during the playoffs, especially the day of that game, which was the Dodgers-Giants Game 5. Now, they did do it early. They did it at about, 1:45 Central Time was when they made the announcement and had the press conference there. So, no, that's interesting, though. One of the reasons that you can do it like this is I don't think the Cardinals are mad at Mike Shildt in the sense where they don't want him to have a future and a career in baseball. So on one hand, you're helping him out because there are managerial openings out there. For example, if the Padres want to hire Mike Shildt, by firing him on Thursday, you give him a head start to potentially get his next job. And then with the Cardinals, now, most people think they're going to stay internal with either Stubby Clapp, who is the first base coach, or Ali Marmol, who's the bench coach. And so if that's the case, finding your next manager is not really that difficult, but there's also hiring practices. You have to interview minority candidates and whatnot. So if there is an external candidate the Cardinals really want, if it's Skip Schumacher, if it's somebody else that we haven't talked about, that's where the Cardinals would also want to get a head start on interviewing their next candidate. So you would want to, once you come to the decision that we're going to fire this guy, you might as well do it as soon as possible to give both parties the best chance to find their next gig.
Charlie, you mentioned Jeff Albert, the hitting coach, and his philosophy. Could you tip us off on what his philosophy is?
Sure. And he's very data driven. He's big on some of the numbers we said earlier, some of the expected numbers, where even if you're not having the results, if your expected batting average, you're expecting on base, your expected slugging percentage are showing, then usually you will get to those numbers eventually. There's a lot of technology. If you watch the Cardinals during batting practice, even, or at spring training, there's cameras all over the place. There's all kinds of cameras that are taking different angles of the hitters so that they can watch the video after the fact and all that. So it's very data driven. It's very technology driven, and all teams are like that. You have to have a good mix. But I think Mike Shildt wanted a little more just of a better approach to situational hitting. And that's where I think the chasm was, which was seemingly much greater than we all thought. And I can't remember if I said this before we started this, but yeah, if you go back to June when the Cardinals were really struggling, their leadoff hitter, Tommy Edman, said, and I'm paraphrasing, but the Cardinals were unprepared. They were unprepared in terms of scouting reports and how they prepared and had an attack plan. So that kind of really got everybody to kind of raise their ears and eyes a little bit. And then also the fact that, this is a former Toledo Mud Hen, Ryan Ludwig, who had some great seasons with the Mud Hens. I think he won the home run derby maybe, or was in it that one year that you guys had the All-Star game. So Ryan Ludwig hit like 37 home runs for the Cardinals in 2008, which was my first year here. And he's been with the Cardinals in the minor leagues as a hitting instructor. And one of the players basically said he had been talking with Ryan Ludwig about how to get back on track. And that's one of those things where if you're an organization and you have a player say, Tommy Edman says we're unprepared, and then another player, Paul DeYoung, says I've been talking with Ryan Ludwig, it doesn't give great confidence to the hitting staff if players are saying that they're unprepared and somebody else is going outside of the major league staff to get advice. So that's kind of, I think, where all of this really started. The Cardinals had a meeting. Mike Shildt said they changed their approach, which makes you wonder, did Mike Shildt go away from Jeff Albert? Did they have more success after that? But also some of the players really like Jeff Albert. Okay. Paul Goldschmidt, Nolan Arenado. If your best players, your $25, $30 million players like the approach and they want to stay with the hitting coach, that's something else you have to take into account, because managers are much easier to replace. You're not going to replace your guys that have $200 and $300 million contracts. So if they want a certain hitting coach, it's best to go with what the players want also.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for that, Charlie. Annette?
There we go.
All right.
I was interested in what you were saying about the broadcasters not going on the road and the disadvantage of not really seeing the game that well. But I was wondering about other things that you might miss out on, like just hearing things in the hotel or meeting some old superstar from that team that might want to come into the broadcast with you or something like that. Some other things that you might miss out on,
Yeah, Annette, no, that's a great point. It's not only being around the team at the hotel, as you said, on the buses. Sometimes for the staff that gets to travel with the team, which is usually TV and radio, it's not the local TV, it's not the newspaper reporters, but it's what they call the rights holder media. So the radio and the TV broadcast that have the rights to the games. Yeah, that's where you get your scoops and your stories from hanging around the dugout before the game. So if you're not on the road, you're not able to just have a quick 5-10 minute chat with Paul Goldschmidt or Nolan Arenado, or as you said, maybe you see him for coffee in the morning or breakfast, or just walking around downtown, and you start to have a conversation and you develop that relationship with the players where then they open up to you. And that's where you get more of your good stories and your good nuggets that you can share on the radio and TV. Now, that's a great point.
And we don't have to just listen to launch angle the whole game, right?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, launch angle bores me even. That's why it's funny though. What's funny about launch angle is the perspective of not being in the ballpark is you can't see the launch angle because it's not the same on TV. And that's why the Cardinals have a great play-by-play guy on TV named Dan McLaughlin. And you could tell he was getting frustrated sometimes, but he was trying to have fun with it. But you're doing your best. You're watching on TV. You want to make an exciting call. The ball's hit, but you don't really know, is it 450 feet or or is it 275 feet? So you kind of have to do that dance. And sometimes you go, oh, that ball was hit. No, it's 50 feet shy, or there's a fly to left. Oh, it's a home run. Like they didn't really know because they didn't have that perspective of being up in the press box and being able to kind of track the trajectory and the flight of the baseball.
Yeah, and if you're Ernie Harwell, you got to find out where all those people are from that are catching fly balls.
Exactly. And that's where, Ernie Harwell, obviously I grew up listening to him, and I got to meet him a couple of times when I was in Lansing, fantastic guy. And then St. Louis's version of Ernie Harwell was Jack Buck. Now you have Joe Buck, obviously doing the World Series in the NFL. And then after Jack Buck left, St. Louis's next legendary broadcaster, Mike Shannon, who just retired after 50 years, he had a lot of Ernie Harwell in him too. In a different way, Ernie Harwell, I think, is like the nicest human being I've ever met. He was just the nicest man ever. And Shannon is also, but Shannon has an edge to him a little more, where he'll tell funny stories. He'll say borderline or not even borderline inappropriate things, which make the broadcast really, really funny. Because he just goes up there and tells stories. And probably some of the stuff he said back in the day would not be allowed these days. But he always made the broadcast really fun because you never knew what he was going to say in the booth.
That's one thing that I miss in today's both TV and radio announcers, whether it's a regional game or a national game, are the stories. I think the statistics that they report are, anybody can find those, but you don't have the opportunity to hear a story from an announcer with Clayton Kershaw or Yogi Berra or, one of those great moments. And I just wish the national broadcasters would incorporate more stories rather than just reporting statistics.
Yeah, no, Tom, I agree with you 100%. And I do like some of the analytics and the stats, but that's also something, as you said, you can look that up. You can go to Baseball Reference and you can find any stat, whether it's your traditional baseball card stat or some of the most crazy advanced stats there are. And I do think that can convolute the broadcast. And then now you add in, so I'm watching the ALCS last night, which was on Fox, and the aforementioned Joe Buck, who's great at his job, he's fantastic. But you can tell they now have to infuse gambling into every at bat. I mean, how many times have you watched that game last night? Did Joe Buck, and he had to do it. I'm sure he doesn't want to, but he understands that it's $1 billion industry. It's going to help baseball. But almost every time there's an at bat, and you have to say, well, Yuli Gurriel is plus 250 to hit a home run. So if you go to Fox Sports Bet and put $100 down, you're going to win 250. And I understand you got to make money, but yes, that can clog up the broadcast, where I've always said this. And that's why I like Mike Shannon. You can go back, obviously, Ernie Harwell, Vin Scully. I want to be entertained. I want stories. I want you to make me laugh. If I had to pick between a broadcaster that was just going to stat me to death versus somebody's going to make me laugh or entertain me, I'll pick the guy to make me laugh or the gal to make me laugh every single time.
I just had one more quick question. What I know about the Cardinals is the '68 World Series. And it seems to me we lost a lot of players from that '68 team over the COVID years here. Bob Gibson.
Lou Brock.
Oh, go ahead.
No, Lou Brock also.
Lou Brock. Were there any others that?
So in terms of, obviously 2020 was a rough year for everybody. And you had so many celebrities and athletes pass away. And I'm trying to think, I'm sure there were some others that weren't as big of stars, but when you talk about just the legends of St. Louis, that's another thing that's great about St. Louis is I do, you guys may be mad for me saying this, but I think St. Louis is the best baseball town in America. And that's not me being a homer because I'm not from there. I just think baseball means more to St. Louis than it does anywhere else. The St. Louis Cardinals, it's woven into the fabric of the city. And so you have all those greats. They'd come back for opening day with their red jackets. You had the Clydesdales going around. And that was the amazing part is you had this history of baseball where when I first got there, Stan Musial was there. Stan Musial, even when he's almost 90, he's playing the harmonica out there. Now he passed away, I think it was about 10 years ago. But yeah, and then you had the next greats. You had Bob Gibson, the best Cardinals pitcher of all time. You had Lou Brock, who, great stolen base guy, obviously Hall of Famer, 3,000 hits. So those two, they were the elder statesmen of the Cardinals for the last 10 years, basically, since Stan Musial died. So to lose both of them in 1 year, and then you come back for an opening day and it's just not the same. Yeah, that was definitely tough on the Cardinals, and both those guys in different ways. Lou Brock was another one of those guys who was the nicest person you've ever met. And Bob Gibson, I think he gets a bad rep because he was such a competitor. Like he wasn't a bad person. He was just ornery. He was ornery. He was ornery as a pitcher, and even as in his later life, he just, when you went up to Lou Brock, he was going to be the nicest person ever. Bob Gibson, hey, Mr. Gibson, can I get an interview? What do you want? But he did it in a way, he wasn't being mean. It was just kind of his persona. He was just the same guy that wanted to knock you down on the mound and bean you. That's kind of how he went about his life as well.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Okay. Janet, any questions?
Sure. To my disappointment, the Cardinals were beat by the Dodgers. Boo. And then the Dodgers beat the Giants, to my horror. I'm not a Dodger fan. Okay. And all the American League is still somewhat playing. But do you have a special team or a team in mind that you think is going to, at least the two teams that are going to go to the World Series, in a favorite?
So I think if you start with the National League, it's tough to bet against the Dodgers, where I think all year long, everybody thought the Dodgers were the best team in baseball. And it was funny because I know I did. I just kept waiting for the Giants to fall off. I just kept saying, there's no way they can keep this up. And they go all the way till the final game. They win 107 games. And they take the Dodgers to the game 5. The Giants are really interesting in the way that they're constructed, which is totally different than the Dodgers. The Dodgers, they spend a ton of money. Now, the Dodgers are also smart with how they operate their franchise with analytics and the farm system and all that. But it's tough to bet against the Dodgers, especially going against the Braves. The Braves are not an elite team by any stretch of the imagination. I think the Cardinals could beat the Braves in the series. I don't know if they could beat the Dodgers. You're going to have Max Scherzer coming back to pitch game 1. We think if his body responds to making the save the other night, which I think it would. I think it will. So if you have Max Scherzer, Walker Buehler, Julio Urias, it's tough to beat that staff. It's tough to beat that lineup. You go up and down their lineup, even without Max Muncy, who's out, who's really good. I mean, you have Trey Turner, the batting champ. Cody Bellinger had a terrible year, and still he had the game-winning hit the other day. I mean, he's a former MVP. What is he batting, like 7th in the lineup? Justin Turner is a great player. Mookie Betts is an MVP. When you start to look at the Dodgers just on paper, and then you get him to a series. That's the thing. The Cardinals could have beat the Dodgers in the 1-game playoff because it's 9 innings. But I don't think anybody thought the Cardinals could beat the Dodgers in a 5 or 7-game series. I think now that the Dodgers are in a 7-game series and their pitching is set up, it's going to be really tough to beat them. Watching the American League game last night, I think that'll be really close. I think that'll go 6 or 7 games. The Astros winning that first game was huge because they don't have Lance McCullers, who's arguably their best starter. So that one's going to go down to the wire. I guess if you ask me to predict, I got to take the Astros just because they won the first game, but I think that's going to be a really good series. It's hard to root for the Astros with all their cheating, but I do want Dusty Baker. I do want Dusty Baker to win a World Series. I think he deserves that. But it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't surprise me if the Red Sox or the Astros got to the World Series, but it would surprise me if the Braves beat the Dodgers.
Charlie, can I go to the Marlow betting app and place $100 to win 1,000 on your prediction?
Sure, absolutely. I should create my own app. That's where all the money is these days, for sure.
Yeah. Bridget, any questions?
Here we go.
Charlie, I'm going to correct you. I think when you were 11 or 12, you wanted to be a Major League Baseball player.
You're right.
I think that was your, Charlie, like many other kids, one of the best in the 6th grade, one of the best in the 8th grade, one of the best in high school. And then you get that big fish in the small pond or vice versa. because Charlie played baseball a bit in college too. So I'm so happy to see that you're making your career covering the sport you love so much. But when you were 11, I don't think you were thinking about being a sportscaster.
Okay, you are right. Mom always has to correct you, even though she did build me up there and say how good I was, I guess, in sixth grade. No, she is right. I did, of course, want to be a baseball player. But in the back of my head, though, I always wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I mean, I think I realized in high school, certainly in college, I wasn't going to be in the major leagues. So, I took it as far as I could. But yeah, as a little kid, I definitely wanted to be a baseball player. Didn't quite work out that well.
All right. Well,
What was your
thanks.
position? What was your
So,
position?
In high school, I played a lot of catcher, little first base.
Yeah.
In college, I was redshirted at Bradley. I didn't get into this, but I was redshirted my first year. I actually got cut the fall of my sophomore year. So I transferred and played at a junior college called Glen Oaks Community College, which is in Sturgis, Centerville, Michigan, there, kind of by the Indiana border. So I played one year. I was there just one semester, my sophomore year, and I played first base and DH. And then, I had a decent year, but I said at that point, okay, it's time to just focus on school. So I actually went back to Bradley and finished school, and didn't play baseball the last 2 years.
All right. Okay, good. We're wrapping up, but I have like to hear your comments. This is the first year that MLB took over the minor leagues. And I think they had a few missteps and a few hits. Any thoughts or comments on how the operation went for MLB and the minor league teams?
Now, are you talking about some of the rule changes or how they got rid of some teams?
Both.
Yeah.
If you want to talk about some of the rule changes or how some of the teams were absorbed, and like Sugarland went from a independent to a AAA, and Minneapolis, St. Paul, Minneapolis is now the AAA. Things along those lines.
Yeah. No, I think that's really unfortunate, even though I get it from a business model standpoint, but I think it's really unfortunate that some of these areas that don't have Major League Baseball, like imagine if Toledo didn't have the Mud Hens. Now, of course, could you drive an hour? But it's a different story. And that would be one of the good scenarios because you'd only have to drive an hour. I'm sure there's some of these places that you got rid of a minor league team and now you have to drive maybe 5 hours. Like look out west. If you got rid of a team out west in some of these small towns, you probably have to drive really, really far to a Denver or a Phoenix to see professional baseball. And so I love minor league baseball. I grew up watching the Mud Hens, Ned Skeldon Stadium. I think my mom can tell you, she maybe even used the Mud Hens as a babysitter sometimes. She could just drop me off. I'm just kidding. But no, she would drop me off at the games and I could go there. And I loved watching Mud Hens games. I think what baseball is doing, I understand why they're doing it. I disagree with it. I don't think it's good for the game. But they want to turn college baseball into what it is for basketball and football. And it makes perfect sense. You allow college baseball, the NCAA, to be your free minor league system. And so if you constrict these teams, you get rid of them, more guys are going to stay in college longer. You're going to stay in your JUCOs. You're going to go to a 4-year school. You're going to stay for 3 years, or less guys are going to get drafted also. You're getting rid of some of the rounds in the draft. So you can now have college baseball where you're playing against really good competition, and it's easier for Major League Baseball to evaluate you. You can use the NCAA as your free minor league system. That's what the NFL and the NBA has been doing for years. And so I think baseball is following that model, even though I don't think it's good for the game to get rid of these teams, especially in the small towns where they don't really have any other professional baseball or they don't have college baseball.
Good point.
Okay. Anybody else have a last comment for Charlie?
Any aspirations, Charlie, of doing play-by-play anywhere?
Yeah, I've always thought about that. Sometimes I wish I would have went in that direction out of college. I never really thought about that. I think that'd be a lot of fun. Nowadays, though, so where I'm at, I don't want to go and start at a minor league team. I mean, I could do high school stuff around here on radio or TV. That's something I'd like to get into more I wonder if I missed the boat a little bit. I'm almost 40 here, and I've been doing local TV and radio now for close to 20 years. That's something though, if the opportunity was right, I would definitely like to do a little bit of that. For example, if it was a local college in St. Louis, doing football or doing baseball or doing basketball.
Okay.
Okay, all right. Anyone else?
Okay, favorite current broadcaster. It doesn't have to be baseball.
Ooh,
It could be
that's good.
football.
That's good. So, and you're talking about somebody who does play-by-play for the games?
Yeah.
That's a good question. It's hard to go against just because you hear your local broadcasters so much. Dan McLaughlin, who does the Cardinals games, is really good. He's fun. He has great calls. I feel like he never misses the moment. And I hear him so often over the last 14 years. He's the one that comes to mind. We have great hockey broadcasters here too, but I'm more of a baseball guy than a hockey guy. So I'd have to say Dan McLaughlin. If you're talking national, I think Joe Buck is really good. Another St. Louis. And I think Joe Buck is really good at just very matter-of-factly explaining the game. He doesn't try to talk too much. He gets out of the way. He lets the pictures and the sound describe the game. He's pretty funny too. Now, some of his partners, John Smoltz is not necessarily this bag of laughs. Troy Aikman,
No, he's not.
right. Sometimes I watch John Smoltz and I'm like, do you like baseball? Do you
Exactly.
like the sport?
I
one of
like
these,
him.
he's one of these, yeah. He's one of these guys that there's a lot of back in my day with John Smoltz. I think he doesn't like some of the analytics as well. That's another one of these debates where a lot of people think baseball's biggest commentators aren't fans of the way that the game is being played these days. And if you want to promote your sport, don't you want guys out there that are more gung-ho about, hey, the young stars of tomorrow who are doing a little bat flipping? And yes, are they being a little more colorful? And some of these old school, especially the pitchers, are, I didn't like that. So that's another one of those debates with baseball, because it does seem like some of the broadcasters are doing the back in my day thing. And I think a lot of people want some of these young stars to show a little more personality.
One thing I have to comment on that, for the Detroit Tiger broadcast, a TV broadcast during the season, they've brought in a few former ball players, and one of them is Jack Morris, who had a little episode where he had to take a break from broadcasting. But I was really impressed with how much he knows about the hitters, their weaknesses, their strengths, what the batter is looking for in the upcoming pitch. Just a remarkable revelation of the guys on the mound are more than a person who throws a baseball and worries about throwing. They also have to worry about the hitter's strengths and weaknesses.
No, I think that's very interesting. And I think probably even more so that's important in the modern game. Now look at Jack Morris. He was going to go out there and throw at least 7 or 8 or 9 innings, but now it's so much matchup driven where look at the game last night. Chris Sale, did he throw even 3 innings? Whenever he was out of the game, right around the 3rd inning or so. So that's based on matchups. And Tony La Russa is really the guy that kind of created the modern bullpen roles where, look, if you don't have a starter like a Max Scherzer or a Jack Morris back in the day, you want to get your best matchups. So you have your lefties versus a lefty, you have your righties versus a righty, you have your ground ball, your sinker ballers. If you need a double play, you got somebody who throws maybe more of a 4-seam if you're looking for a strikeout. And you want to take the hitter's strengths away. Now you don't want to get away from your strengths. I think sometimes we focus too much on, like, if you're a pitcher, if you're really good, you also want to do what you do well and not only focus on the hitter. But nowadays it's so matchup driven. You know exactly what this guy likes to hit, his hot zone, his cold zone. There's all the numbers about a pitcher and how his numbers look first time through the order, second time through the order. There are some organizations, they're just not going to let you throw the 3rd time through the order because the numbers say it's not good. Even if Blake Snell, like we saw last year in Game 6 of the World Series, is just pitching an unbelievable game. Numbers wise, they say we're going to take him out. Sometimes I'd like a little more of, hey, watch the guy out there. He's getting everybody out. He's striking everybody out. When you take a pitcher out and the other team is happy about it, that's not a good thing. But yeah, baseball, I mean, you're basically gonna try to create a pitching matchup to eliminate the strengths of the hitters. And that's where, not to get too deep into it, but everybody talks about the shift and people say, oh, hit the ball the other way. It's not that easy. Can you bunt it the other way? Sure. But if you're a 40 homer hitter, you've taken your strength away by not hitting a double in the gap, by not hitting a home run. And also they're pitching to the shift, right? They have 3 infielders on that side of the infield. And they're pitching to try to make you hit that ball where you're hitting a line drive rocket that goes to the second baseman who's 200 feet away and he's going to throw you out at first base. So it's not as easy as, oh, just change your approach and hit the ball the other way. The pitching staff, they're also pitching to the shift to try to make it as hard as possible for a left-handed hitter to have success.
Let's get rid of the shift. Yay.
I agree.
kidding.
No, I agree with that.
No.
A lot of players,
Way.
a lot of players would like to get rid of the extreme shifts. So you'd have to have 2 players on each side of second base. Now, maybe you could have a rule where you said, look, you can do 2 extreme shifts per game, maybe in select situations. I think something like that would make sense. But I do think overall the shift is making baseball worse. I think it makes it more boring, less offensive, less ball in play. And big picture, I don't think that's good for the future and the entertainment value of the game.
I hate the shift.
I do
A
too.
modified form would be fine, but
If one
Just my
were
opinion.
to be eliminated, the extreme shift, as you call it, or the adopting the idea that infielders needed to have 1 foot on the dirt, would you see one or the other options being implemented sooner than the other?
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. I will say, like, if you go back, think about some of these moments where a manager will bring in an outfielder to create a 5-man infield. I think because you would see that in a situation once or twice a year. I think that's kind of cool. So I don't want to eliminate that. It's more so I want to eliminate most of it. And that's how I feel about some of the rules with Major League Baseball that a lot of people don't like. People don't like the 3-batter minimum. People don't like the runner on second in the 10th inning, which I understand. I'm actually
I like it. I like it.
I'm for those rules in the regular season because look, the postseason is watered down now. It's not like back in the day where you had to win your division. You have 2 wild cards. So to me, make the regular season more interesting, make the game shorter, make them more fun, make them more interesting. It's the regular season. When you get to the postseason, make it old school baseball. I wish they'd get rid of the 3-batter minimum in the playoffs, and they have gotten rid of the guy on second in the playoffs, but I liken it to hockey. I like the 4-on-4 overtime in hockey, which is gimmicky, but it eliminates a lot of shootouts. It ends the games quicker. And I like that in the regular season, but I would never want a Stanley Cup playoff game to be decided by that. And that's why hockey has the old school rules in the playoffs. That's what I think baseball should do.
All right. What about this year? We saw 2 teams win more than 100 games, and one of the teams became a wild card. Do you think we would see down the road where teams are ranked in a bracket similar to what we see in NCAA basketball tournament, where the highest plays the lowest?
That's a great question. And I think what's funny about that, we talked about this a lot on the radio before the Cardinals played the Dodgers. If the Cardinals would have beaten the Dodgers because the Cardinals took down the big bad Dodgers, the 106-win Dodgers, that rule probably would have changed this offseason because it would have been seriously, because it would have been the Dodgers losing. And you don't want LA and the number 2 market in baseball to be out of the playoffs.
Exactly.
I do think this was a weird year, though. So I didn't think it was fair that the Dodgers, who were what were they? I think 16 games, whatever it was, better than the Cardinals. Yeah, the Cardinals won 90 games. Dodgers won 106. I didn't think it was fair that the Dodgers that won 16 games more than the Cardinals could have lost in one 9-inning game. So in a way, even though we're rooting for the Cardinals here, I think that was more fair. I also think this was just a really weird year where you had the 2 best teams record-wise in baseball in the same division. That's not going to happen every year. look at the American League wildcard picture. The American League wildcard picture was a lot closer, where you had about 5 teams that were very close. If you look at the Red Sox, the Yankees, the Blue Jays, who else was in it towards the end there?
Oakland,
The Mariners, Seattle, right? All those teams were kind of similar. And that's why they created 2 wild cards. I think that makes a lot of sense. This was a weird year where the Dodgers, you knew were going to be the first wild card, or the Giants if they flip-flopped. We laughed about it all year long. Like, here's the Dodgers 20 games better than whoever's going to be in the second wild card, whether it ended up being the Cardinals, but it could have been the Padres or the Reds, whoever it was. We were saying all year long, this just doesn't feel right.
Think how much it would have changed, though, if the Giants and the Dodgers would have been seeded 1 and 2 regardless, versus the pennant race that they had. They were down to the wire. They were down to the last game in the season. I think it dilutes the regular season a little bit by seeding teams. I kind of like the idea of the way they have it set up. Wild card's a wild card. It's not like basketball or football where half the teams make the playoffs. Let's scale it down a little bit, put a whole lot of emphasis on the regular season. I like that. That last week of baseball is just a hoot, because who knows what's going to happen. And if you start seeding teams, what's the difference between a number 1 seed versus a number 2 seed? One will play 8 and 2 will play 7. Well, that who knows what's going on there. The way it ended up playing out between the Dodgers and the Giants was that it put a whole lot of emphasis on the first place team to avoid that one shot take all deal. And I think that's pretty cool. I tendency to like that idea.
Yeah, I think this year you had the best of both worlds there, because the Dodgers and the Giants played right down to game 162. Many thought it would take a game 163, which it didn't.
Yeah.
So you had that great division race there. The other divisions, you didn't have good races because the Brewers were so far ahead of the Cardinals for most of the year. You did at the end there, you had the Phillies and the Braves, but the Braves separated themselves at the end. So I think you had the best of both worlds in the National League. You had one really good division race. And then what's funny is that the Cardinals wrapped up the second wild card with like 6 days left in the season, where if you'd have asked me that a month before, that not only the Cardinals are the wild card, if that would have happened, you had to think it was game 162. It was a tiebreaker for the Cardinals to win 17 straight. And the Padres absolutely just fell off a cliff to the fact that this is a Cardinals team we didn't talk about much. We didn't say they were this elite team. We weren't talking about them as this great team. And even in previous years when the Cardinals made the playoffs, they were always clinching game 159, game 160, 161, 162. So for this team that was 500 for most of the year, to clinch their berth on the Tuesday, whatever it was before the final week, was pretty crazy.
What was that 17-game winning streak like? I mean, did the Cardinals come back a whole bunch of games? Were they in control for most of it? I mean, I didn't even know it was going on until they hit, like, I think it was the Cubs series when it was like 9, 10, 11 in a row. Then it got kind of national. What was it like the beginning of all that?
Yeah, it was a little bit of everything. There was a lot of comebacks, though. There was a lot of comebacks. Trying to think of the Cubs series. I think there was a game that they were down maybe even 4 or 5 runs. I remember the Cubs hit a grand slam against them. There was a ton of comebacks. There was a bunch of great moments. There was a catch by Lars Nootbaar that he robbed a home run that helped them win one of those games. Basically, in my opinion, the game that turned it was a Saturday night versus the Padres, because during this weekend series, and the Cardinals ended up sweeping the Padres, but the Padres still had life at this time. It was a Saturday game. It was just the worst umpired game ever. It was the largest strike zone, which is funny because Yu Darvish, I think he went 7 innings, struck out 9 or 10, maybe allowed a run, whatever it was. And San Diego was so desperate for pitching, for them to lose that game, where they got a great start from Yu Darvish. And it was Tyler O'Neill who hit a 2-run homer late in the 8th or the 9th. I think it was the 8th inning to win that game. Yeah, I can't think off the top of my head, but I want to say there was 4 or 5 moments where the Cardinals had big comebacks or big hits or big plays. There was a huge double play, I remember. relievers coming in a jam and getting a double play to end the inning. TJ McFarland, who is the Cardinals kind of lefty specialist, to get double plays. There was a bunch of moments like that. Yeah, it wasn't a boring 17-game winning streak by any means. There was a lot of interesting late game heroics there.
Okay. All right. Well, Charlie, I would have to say thank you very much from the top of my heart, and Bridget for setting this up. We're American League City, and thank you for the insight into the Cardinals. That was really, really great. Anything else before we leave? Anybody want to make a last comment?
No, just appreciate it, Charlie, for your time, insights. I like how diplomatic you are.
I try. Well, it's funny. Tom mentioned, I get into it with people in St. Louis because I prefer the DH. So I'm still an American League guy watching Tigers and Indians. And I don't like watching pitchers hitting 150 and striking out all the time. So I clash with St. Louis and Whitey Ball there because I am wanting the DH in both leagues.
What do you think about the National League, along with keeping the pitcher as a hitter, have a 10th player, the DH? So you'd have 10 guys in the lineup, and that would keep the pitcher batter hit by pitch strategy alive.
Yeah, I wouldn't be a fan of that. I don't think that's going to happen. I know you have that. You kind of have a softball situation sometimes with an extra hitter, and you'll have that in baseball at lower levels. But I kind of like the nine batter lineup. I don't think that's going to change. I do think the DH is coming to the National League, and probably this year with the new CBA. And I do think even if you're an old school National League baseball fan, I think people are going to realize that, yeah, is it fun? Is it worth it when Bartolo Colon hits a home run, which is the greatest moment ever? We all know that was like 5 years ago. But is that worth just 5 at-bats a game of a pitcher being absolutely dominated? It'd be one thing if a pitcher could hit, which is why I love the Shohei Ohtanis of the world. If you're Shohei Ohtani and you deserve to hit and you're good, bring those guys on. But the guys that just are inept up there, baseball will be more fun when we have legit DHs, and you don't see a lot of that, in my opinion.
Do you think we'll ever see the time when either a World Series or a playoff game is moved to a neutral site, or in the spring when we have games in March and April in Boston and some of the northern cities cringe at the temperatures, move those games to a neutral site?
Yeah, I think stuff like that is definitely on the table. If it makes money for the league, they're going to do it. Now, I do like the traditional home and road, especially for a playoff series. But when you look at some of the marquee events, the Field of Dreams game, you have the game they have in Williamsport for the Little League World Series. I think they're going to try to do more of that stuff. Maybe they go to the Dominican, or if they could have a game in Cuba or Mexico, we've seen that. You see the NFL going to London. I do think you're going to have more marquee events like that at cool places. And yeah, down the road, could you have like a Super Bowl type situation? Maybe for a wild card. Like, how about this? If you're trying to basically have a wild card game, that could be in Las Vegas or Miami or something like that. If the league can make money off ticket revenue and more so off television, I think all that stuff's on the table.
Okay, good. All right. Thank you again, Charlie. I'll be in touch with that recording. Hopefully I can send it to you. Otherwise, have a good season, and everyone else, thank you for joining us. Thanks again.
Tom. Thanks, Charlie.
All right. Bye-bye.
Love you,
Bye.
Mom. Love you, Mom.
Love you too.
Good ending.
See you guys. Thank
Yeah.
you.
All right.
Perfect.
Bye-bye.